I was a full-time touring musician, and I during that time, I had performed in over 37 states, hundreds of nightclubs. I performed in the Bahamas, cruise ships, and I finally had worked my way up to I was working with some national level recording artists, and I had auditioned to work with a gentleman named Razzie Bailey, somebody nobody's ever heard of, country artist. And at the time, he was between record labels. So I went up and auditioned in Macon, Georgia, and that was his home base. So I auditioned and he accepted me. So I started working for him. And we would either play these gigantic nightclubs of 1 to 2,000 people, just really large clubs, and or we would play giant bluegrass festivals. And depending upon the group I was in, I either played flute and saxophone, or I played bass. Well, with Razzie, I played primarily bass. So I got to work with all kind of national, international level musicians in and out of Nashville and all that. It was a lot of fun. Well, at age 28, my wisdom teeth decided to come in. I was a late bloomer. Well, I didn't have any dentists. I mean, I was touring. Well, one of the guys in the band, he knew of somebody locally in Macon, Georgia, a dentist that could do the work. So I signed up with him, and sure enough, when it was time, I went in, but I should have heeded the warning signs. When I went in there, I asked him, "You're gonna put me to sleep, aren't you?" And he goes, "No, we'll just give you local anesthetics." And I said, "But you want to take out all four of my wisdom teeth?" He said, "We'll be fine." So I thought, "Okay, this don't sound good." So anyway, he starts the pole went out after he numbed me. He thought he numbed me, and believe it or not, the tooth didn't want to come out. And then to his horror, he discovered the roots of my wisdom teeth are hooked, so they would not come out. So then he got the bright idea, went over to his arsenal of weapons. I like to have fun with him. His arsenal of weapons, he pulled out a chisel and a hammer. And I thought, oh, this is not going well. So he come over and he told me, put your arm under your chin, hold your chin up while I pound on your tooth. He was going to try to split the wisdom teeth in half. Well, okay, so I decided to do that. Now, this is 1978. I guess this is back in the primitive era. So I was like this, and he started pounding. The pain was unbearable. The pain, I've never experienced pain like that in my life. It was just horrendous, and I felt like my jaw was gonna come off because he was really, really pounding. And my wife said she was in the waiting room, 2 rooms away, and she could hear the dentist doing that, like, "Oh my goodness." So anyway, so here I am, and I'm in all this pain, and then all of a sudden, got this, like, a flash of electricity in me, and the next thing I knew, I was up out of my body. I was above my body. I was up near the ceiling. And so and I was just like, "Okay, so what is this?" I mean, all of a sudden, I wasn't in any pain. I felt pretty good, actually, but I didn't know what happened. So I was just kinda looking around, and I looked down, and I saw the dentist and his, dental assistant. They were grabbing me and screaming and starting to shake me. Like, just shake me like that and all that, and I was up there like, "Well, I don't know what's going on down there," and I didn't even recognize my own body at first. I was just like, "This is pretty cool, whatever it is." I was just having fun. So and then after a minute or 2, I realized, I think that's my body. I think that's my body down there, and of course, the body was just completely out, and the dental assistant, she was slapping me and shaking me, and the doctor, he was trying to shake me and do all that, and, but after several minutes of that, I was just having a fun time looking around, and eventually I realized I had, like, 360 vision. I could see all around me. So, all of a sudden, I could see the receptionist. She quit doing what she was doing. I think she stood up and was looking right towards the dental office like, "What is going on in there?" Because she could hear them screaming. at me. And then I kept looking beyond where the receptionist was at, and I could see my wife. My wife had been reading a magazine, and she finally put the magazine down, and she was looking up like, what on earth is going on? So all this is going on. I'm just having a good old time here, looking around, trying to figure out what is happening. People have asked me, did I have a body or not a body? And I really cannot answer that because I never really looked down. I just was looking around as far as looking at myself. So I really don't know. But all of a sudden, I had like another flash of electricity. And next thing I knew, I was back in my body. And Lord have mercy. Let me tell you what, that's a horrible pain to go through. She was slapping me and he was shaking me. And next thing I know, I finally opened my eyes and I could see the dentist. He just went, he was greatly relieved. I'm probably the first patient ever did that to him. So, and then he had the nerve to ask me, you want me to still try to take out your wisdom teeth? Well, by then he had taken out like two of them. And so I think eventually he was able to pull out a third. And by then I just said, enough's enough. So to this day, I still have one of the wisdom teeth in me. I still do. That's a reminder of life. So that's where that was at. And my wife had to drive me home. I felt horrible. Back to the hotel, I should say. She drove me back to the hotel. And then that night, I was supposed to work for Razzie Bailey in this gigantic nightclub that night. I was supposed to. So she drove me there, bless her soul. And I tried to play, but I felt I had two different things going on. I felt horrible from the pain, absolutely horrible from that pain that I had experienced. And what I didn't know at the time, I also have a heart arrhythmia. I was born with it. And it brought back memories later in my life that when I was a child, I would be playing like 4 or 5 years old and I would collapse while I'm playing. And my parents used to pick me up and like, what on earth? And they would pick me up and rush me to the hospital. And by the time I got to the hospital, I was fine. What had happened, my heart had gone back in normal arrhythmia. So I was okay. So the doctors never could find anything. And then during my teenage years, it sort of went away. And I didn't have anything again like that until the day of my dental appointment. The pain apparently set it off. So my wife took me she drove me to the nightclub and I tried to play, but I couldn't play. So I talked to Razzie at the time and he agreed, okay, you can go home that night. It was like a Monday night. It was slow. So I went home. And so I had that experience. And then it wasn't maybe a couple weeks later, I had an individual, he came in the club while I was on stage performing with Razzie. And I noticed, for some reason, I noticed him. He was just different. He was just different. And so I kind of watched him as I'm playing because, you get bored up there. So I was watching him. And he ordered a drink and sat down. So on the break, as we played a set, he walked over and asked me if he could buy me a drink. And I thought, well, yeah, sure. You know, that's how musicians get all these free drinks. So I sat down with him and then he went right into his spiel. He said he was a full-time touring musician like I was, and he had just come off the road, and he came in for a drink, and he saw me, and then he looked me right in the face, and he says, I'm now working on my second divorce. I've been in rehab several times. And then he leaned over to me and looked at me. He said, you need to get out of this business before you end up like me. You need to get out of this full-time business. And then he got up and he left. And I never saw him again. And it was like, okay, what was that all about? And then, so I had the NDE, and then I had that back to school. You need to go back to school. Well, to tell why that's an important topic, you have to know my childhood. I was born very prematurely, and I wasn't expected to live. Now, this is back during the Dark Ages, back in the 1950s. And if you're born, I was 6 weeks premature, and back then that's almost like a death sentence because they really couldn't handle preemie babies back then like they do today. So anyway, I was born. I wasn't expected to live, but fortunately, I did. And in fact, that night, they told my mother that I probably wouldn't live till the next morning. And so, bless her soul, she was just bawling her head off. She's only 17 at the time. She was really upset. So they brought in a chaplain for her, and she told the chaplain, and the chaplain told her, see that Bible over there on your table? She goes, yes. So he handed it to her. He says, open it up to a random page. So she did. And he says, close your eyes and just point on a page somewhere. So she did. And he says, whatever name you're by, you're going to name your child that and he's going to live. Well, that's how I got my name, David. And then the next morning, there I am. I'm still alive. So that was my roaring introduction coming into the world. But since I was born prematurely, I have a lot of internal and external deformities. And because of that, I was also born very, very frail, puny looking, very underweight. So I had to go through that. Well, when I was a young child, I found out early on, people looked at me differently. And because of that, I was picked on by the bullies. I was picked on very harshly. Even in elementary school, the bullies would come up behind me and grab me and slam me against the wall or a pole just for fun. They would do that. And by junior high school, it got so bad, they used to drag me in the boys' bathroom, stick my head in the urinal, or kick me or beat on me. So this is what my youthful upbringing was all about. I grew up in a very warm and loving family. I could not ask for anything more. Two brothers and a sister and beautiful, warm, loving parents. So that was my sanctuary growing up with my family. They were really awesome people. But the problem is because of the way I felt, because of the abuse, I was always told I was a failure, I was no good, nothing would ever happen. What happened was I gave up with school. I just gave up. But of course, until you're 16, you can't quit. And my mother, she definitely wouldn't let me quit. She was pretty hard fast with that. So I had to go to school and I had to learn how to work my way to avoid the bullies. I would know what hall they hang out with, which bathrooms they were in, because they were always smoking, different things like that. And I would try to find ways to avoid them. And I got pretty good at that. Well, by early high school, most of the bullying had stopped because most of them had flunked out of school by then or joined the military because this was back during the Vietnam War. So, you know, they would they would have to join the military. So I had to do that. But what happened was I felt like it's an academic failure. But by the grace of God, I graduated with a C average, having never virtually cracked a book open. So that's what it was like. So I even got into a college that next fall because if you didn't go to college, you could be drafted. So I did. And then that next year, and again in college, I was only making C averages. That's all I could do. But the next year they had the military lottery, something you would have no idea what it is, bless your soul. But the lottery was they decided to come up with, you know what a modern lottery is. They roll the thing and they get numbers and all that. What they would do, they would assign numbers to each letter of the alphabet. And so they would do it. Somehow they did it for 365 days of the year. And the higher the number that they pulled out, the less chance you would be drafted that year. And after that year, you will never be drafted. That's what they come up with. Well, I remember I had to go up for my physical. And at the time, with my health ills that I had, they still passed me 1A And they said they'd see me in 2 weeks when they drafted me. And I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? And then that very next week, they held the first lottery. I got a 250. A 250 meant virtually I probably would not be drafted that year. So, as it turned out, I was not drafted. So as soon as I found that out, I quit college and I went back to I went into full-time music because that's what I was good at. I started flute in the 4th grade, played music all the way through school, and I excelled at it. I was really that was my thing. I knew that if somehow music was gonna set me forward in life some way. So that got me all the way into my first NDE. First time I met that individual who came into the club, and now I've got to talk to these voices inside my head that's telling me, "You need to go back to school. You need to go back to school." Well, obviously, I was terrified because I was an academic failure. But anyway, there was a wonderful university in Macon, Georgia called Mercer University. Just a wonderful university. And so I got the nerve and I went and I auditioned for them. And then the administration in the music department, they had to go huddle and have a little meeting. And they came back out and they said, well, we got some good news for you. And I was like, they said, we're going to give you the largest music scholarship we ever have. Then they said, this is the part I cannot believe. We're also going to give you the largest academic scholarship they've ever done. And I even confronted them. I said, me? I said, you got my academic scholastic record right in front of you. And this is the words they used. They said, we have total faith that you will be just fine academically, that you will do just fine. That was identical to the voices I had been hearing. Absolutely identical. So what happened then, I gave my notice to Razzie. Razzie went and signed with RCA Records. The rest is history with him. And I went back to school. Believe it or not, when I went back to school, I made the dean's list every semester all the way through my 4-year degree. 4-year degree. Again, this is what's amazing about it. And so it decided it was going to start acting up on me. So what happened several times while I was back in college, my heart would go into arrhythmia. And what it does, during those days, I would have flutter attacks where I might start fluttering for 20, 30 seconds, and then it would quit. And maybe the rest of the day I'm fine. Maybe the next day it would start fluttering again. And then eventually the fluttering would get closer and closer, and I might be more of them in a day. And then it might be months apart, and then eventually I would go into arrhythmia, in and out of arrhythmia. And when I'm in arrhythmia, what happens is I can't sit up, I can't move, I can barely talk. Because my kind of arrhythmia is atrial fibrillation. And when I'm into that, my heart's over 200 beats a minute. Everything's just totally out of control. Some people can live with the heart in that. I cannot. So I'm basically on my back the entire time. It's so bad. And my heart did that several times while I was attending college. And one of the worst ones was when they had to rush me to the Macon hospital, put me in the cardiac unit, wire me up and all that, and at that time, that's when my heart decided to stop again. I went into this black void. It was just a black, dark void. No sound, no pain, no nothing. It was just this void. It's very calming. And, I'm getting to the point, if you start having, you just like, well, this is interesting. So what is happening now? You know, and I don't know how long I was in that position, but I just felt like, I could stay here forever. It was just very, very calm. And then it must have been several minutes. And then all of a sudden I was back in my body in the cardiac unit in the hospital. I could hear all the bells and lights going on. So I guess I coded blue and all the doctors and nurses had just run back in to treat me. And I'm sitting there basically going, I'm back. That's how it hits me. When I come back, I'm just very weak, but I'm fine. So this was my process from my late 20s, early 30s. I would be in and out of the hospital several times, and this would happen. Eventually, I did get my degree, and for 10 years, I was a band director, teaching several schools, and totally enjoyed it as a band director, and had wonderful students. And then I got that same voice inside of me. It said, "David, it's time to go back to school again." I'm like, how much blood can I give here? By then, I had my master's degree. I got that on the side while I was a band director, and now it wanted me to go back to do my doctorate. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know about this. Because I had one son in elementary school, one son in high school. He's like, and I got to make a full-time living and all that. How am I going to do that? But sure enough, that voice just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so eventually I went up to the University of Georgia and I auditioned for them. I had to do a full recital in front of the entire woodwind faculty. And they had their little meeting, and then it came back, and the flute professor told me, yes, you have been accepted. So then the next step was, well, how am I going to make a living? Athens, Georgia is 2.5 hours away from where I was living. That's a good one. Yeah, how am I going to do that? But I know by then I have to have faith that this voice wouldn't be telling me this without the faith. So at the time, I had a small private teaching studio that I taught on the side when I was a band director. I'd have maybe 8 or 10 flute students, and then I'm like, well, how can I make this work? And then this is the way spirit works for me. All of a sudden, I got all this information, how to grow the studio, how to make it work. And sure enough, by using these different means of advertisement, different ways of getting to know the area band directors, I very quickly built it up to almost 60 private students. 60. Yeah, that was fantastic. It was beyond my wildest imagination. So I gave the school I was at, I gave him my notice that I would not be returning in the fall. And I was getting ready to do my students, get all that set up. My precious wife, she was able to get a job as a part-time helper at a local church. So we were all set to go. And then I went back to school, and the way it worked, I had to live in Athens Monday through Thursday night, and then I would drive home Friday afternoon. And from Friday afternoon until Sunday night, I taught all those students. And then early Monday morning, 3 to 4 in the morning, I would get up and drive that 2.5 hours back to Athens to go to classes the next week. And then I started getting phone calls from 2 other colleges that wanted me to teach part-time. And I'm thinking, okay, so how am I going to do this? But as it worked out, I was able to teach these 2 different colleges. They needed a flute teacher for both colleges. And I did a part-time in between my classes while I was working on my doctorate. So the only reason I tell all this, because obviously this was all a setup. In other words, they're helping me. They're setting all this up for me. I just needed some guidance on how to do it. I got my doctorate. Again, like my master's, like my bachelor's, I've had the highest honors I graduated with, almost an A average in everything I did compared to my previous life, which is so incredible. Fortunately, after I graduated with my bachelor's up through my doctorate, my heart kind of calmed down again. And I really didn't have a bad issue for that 10 or 15 years until I finished my doctorate. And then the only downside to get my doctorate, I pretty much shut myself off from teaching any public school job because they wouldn't hire me because of my extended education. They didn't want to pay for it. So I realized I had to look nationally for a college position because they're so competitive. There'll be hundreds of applicants for one position. It's just incredible. So I did. And I got my first job at Peru State College in Nebraska. So my beautiful family, we had to move them all up there, and I taught there. The day after we moved in, my heart went back in arrhythmia. It's the same thing. I went, "Hello, I'm still here." So it did that, and this time they were really getting severe. So here I am in the local hospital. They really didn't know what to do with me, and so I. And then they were talking about, well, maybe we just need to leave you in arrhythmia the rest of your life. And we all realized I couldn't do anything. What am I going to do? Lay on my back the rest of my life. That's all I could do. But fortunately, after a week or so, it went back and it completely realigned. I was back in normal rhythm. So by the time I started teaching that fall, my heart was fine. And then probably I was in arrhythmia again, maybe two or three more times in that period. And after a week or two, it would quit. But finally, there was this one last time it would not go back in arrhythmia, and it literally waited till the last day of my spring semester teaching, and then I went into arrhythmia. So I spent the whole summer on my back in bed at my house, almost 2.5 months, because they tried medicating me more. They tried everything. Nothing would work. Finally, this one doctor said, we need to get you hooked up with the heart cardiac unit in Sioux City. And so we did, and they got me over there. And at the time, there were some new things going on called heart ablation surgeries. You don't, you won't know what that is either, but that's where they go in through an artery in your leg. This sounds gross. And they go up into your heart and they burn and cauterize different parts of your heart to stop those phantom electrical signals from coming in. So I thought, okay, I had to go to Omaha to have it done. Well, that one worked for about 6 or 7 years. It worked well. And then sure enough, there it is again. It happened. And so another doctor had to do an ablation on me. That one took about 7 hours for him to do it. He decided to burn everything, I guess. My heart really hurt for several days after that. But again, I was good for a while. And then I went back in again. And he decided we're going to try one more time. So he did. Within a month, I was back in arrhythmia again. And this is where the doctor he was such a precious soul. He really was. He came to me after, and he said, I can't do any more for you. There's nothing medical science can do for you now. And he was just crying. He really was a precious soul. He really wanted to help me. And my wife took me home. And then eventually it straightened up and I was okay. So I was okay for another couple years. And then finally, in the early 2000s, we were by then I was teaching at Buena Vista University in Iowa. I had moved up to that job. And so we were in Sioux City again when I went. No, this time we weren't in Sioux City. And went to arrhythmia. I was in the local hospital. And my wife came in one more time, poor thing. She has all these visits she has to do. She came in and, we talked. And then she left, and by then, I finally I said, "My whole life I've had to deal with this. My whole entire life." I said, "I can't do this anymore." I said, and I raised my hands, and I literally I said, "I put this in your hands. I can't do this anymore." Well, the next morning, my heart went back to normal rhythm, and that was the last time I've been in arrhythmia. I just felt so relieved because, you know, just think of you're living a normal life, something catastrophic happens, and then after you kind of get back to your health, then you got to pick up the pieces and keep trying to move forward. That's what it was like every single time. So eventually, it just really started wearing me down. And I've been very blessed. I was trying a few years ago to put together why was my journey the way it was and is? Why did I have to go through the abuse? Why did I have the health issues? And then I started realizing Why? I was my health issue and my abuse was meant for me to help when I was a teacher helping children that I can spot in a second if they have problems like that. I can tell in a second if a child is in an unloving family or if a child's being abused in some way. I can also spot the bullies, and believe me, when I'm around them, I stop that in a second. But I feel like that was all part of my journey to help other people by sharing what I've overcome. In fact, I put a book out a few years ago about my life, and one of my former students, when I was a band director, she contacted me. She told me that was the most beautiful book and she's ever read, and she said that mirrors her life, and she wanted to thank me because when she was in my band, if I knew she was being abused, and if I ever saw it, I stopped it. And she said the way I always treated her like she was something special and loved. And she said she really needed that from someone. And so I feel like maybe that's part of my purpose is to share that love. God loves you very much, and you're not alone. When I was growing up, after the beatings, I'd be on the floor in the boys' bathroom bleeding, and I would just go, to God, and I would get this message: "You'll be fine. You'll have to hang in there. You're gonna be fine." And sure enough, I found a beautiful wife. I have 2 beautiful boys, 2 beautiful granddaughters. I've had a wonderful career in my life. I've met so many wonderful people I've shared my life with and hopefully to continue sharing that. That's because of this of this relationship. So here's my book, if I get it right. It's called Finding the Boy Inside, and you just go to Amazon.com, type in Dr. David Klee and the title of the book, and I will come up, and they can get the book. It's an easy read. It's about my life. I share some of the musicians I got to work with nationally and internationally. Like I worked with the Four Tops Temptation. I got to work with Ringling Barnum Bailey Circus, things like that. A lot of fun gigs I got to do. And then also the abuse is in there and how I've overcome it. There's a lot of information that could help somebody like that to help them. They're not alone. They're not alone. They can also go to Spotify, type in Dr. David Klee, and I've got 6 or 8 albums out on there. Smooth jazz, classical music, pop music. And then lastly, if they go to YouTube and type in Dr. David Klee, I come up and I've got hundreds of videos, anywhere from smooth jazz, classical music, flute tutorials and all that. All that's in there.